pursuing scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. And welcome to Technocracy News. This is Patrick Wood, Editor-in-Chief, and I'm not going to tell you the date today that we're making this podcast, but this is a timeless edition, and you're going to want to share this with your friends and associates and colleagues and fellow patriots around the country. I have in the studio with me Mr. Alex Newman, who is an American journalist, a consultant who writes about economics, finance, banking, business, politics. He's all over the place. All over the United States and abroad. He's traveled all across the United States. He's been in Europe, stayed in Europe for extended times. And he's currently making a tour of the country talking about education. And back in, I think it was 2015, Alex co-authored a book with Sam Blumenfeld called Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. This is such a critical topic. We haven't covered education a lot on Technocracy News and Trends recently, but this is a critically integrated part of the whole plan of Technocracy. We'll relate it to sustainable development as well. And what's happening in the education world today is not surprising considering the big picture. The more you understand the big picture, the more you'll understand pieces of it, like the education piece and where all the stuff came from. And so I'm going to start this out by just reading a very short paragraph from the Technocracy study course, which was, of course, the Bible of technocracy in the 1930s. It was written primarily by M. King Hubbard, who was a co-founder of Technocracy. And on page 232, it says, there is likewise a complete record of all hospitals on the education system, amusements, and other of the more purely social services. We already know that the Technocracy prescribed complete data collection and surveillance on everything that moved in society, everything human, everything inhuman, all animals. They wanted to control everything, and they wanted data on everything. A little bit further in the next section, when they got into actually the various service sectors, as they called them, they said this. It said, the end product attained by a high-energy social mechanism on the North American continent will be, and here's the utopia, a high physical standard of living, a high standard of public health, a minimum of unnecessary labor, a minimum of wastage of non-replaceable resources. Now here's the kicker. An education system to train the entire younger generation indiscriminately as regards to all considerations other than inherent ability, hyphen, a continental system of human conditioning. Now, here we have a very low view of humanity and children and education in general. They called it a continental system of human conditioning, not education, but conditioning, to be able to fit in and be good little parts of the technate, as they call it. You know, everything's going to run just fine, but you have to do your part. You have to do your part. You have to be conditioned to fit in to society the way they wanted you to fit in. So having said that, and just kind of related to Technocracy, welcome Alex Newman to Technocracy News and Trends. We're going to take off with this and have a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me in the studio, Pat. It's really great to be with you. And what a brilliant quote. I had not heard that before, but it perfectly describes what we have now, except it's not just continental. It is becoming quickly a global system. And it really is conditioning. You know, people think they send their children to school to receive an education. And education would imply at the very minimum that they're going to be learning how to read, how to write, how to do basic mathematics. And in reality, that's not really happening anymore. And the government's data shows that clearly. What is happening is behavioral conditioning. So they decide, you know, what are the responses that we want as we expose children to different stimuli, and then how do we get there? And it really goes right to the heart of what John Dewey wanted. John Dewey was really the founding father of our public education system. At least he gets the credit as such. Maybe Horace Mann deserves some of the blame too. But he teamed up with these behavioral psychologists coming out of the University of Leipzig, and their view of people was that they're really just slightly more sophisticated animals, and that they need to be conditioned or trained just like you would train a circus animal or a carrier pigeon. And I mean, that is the heart of their philosophy on education, and that's what we see today. It's gotten more and more absurd with each passing year, but that is what we're dealing with now.
Right. Now, I know you're on a nationwide tour right now, and you happen to be in Phoenix, Arizona. But to tell our listeners a little bit about, okay, what's this all about? This national tour. You've got your family with you. You're traveling. I know you're visiting some sites along the way too, like the Grand Canyon recently. But give us an insight into what this trip is all about, the scope of it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pat. So I decided, I actually never stepped foot in an American government school. In fact, I never stepped foot in a school in America until university. So I was kind of oblivious to what my people were facing. I am an American. I was born in America, but I've been overseas all my life going to different international schools. And so I had no clue what was happening. And we returned here, and my brother was almost completely destroyed within 1 year of government education. I thought, wow, that's suspicious. So started learning a little bit about Common Core as I was getting a degree in journalism at the University of Florida. This was in the very early stages of Common Core when it was just starting to be talked about. And got interested and said, whoa, this doesn't sound right. A national standard is being imposed by Obama. That's really weird. So got to looking, and over the years I got more and more suspicious, started working with Dr. Sam Blumenfeld, and he spent 60 years of his life studying this education issue. So as I learned from him that this wasn't just, some kind of accident, that Americans were becoming illiterate by the millions, that they couldn't even, they didn't know right and wrong, they couldn't work out basic math problems, I decided that education was the issue for me to focus on, at least for a certain time, because it transcends all the other issues. I mean, we're destroying our children, we're destroying our country, we're destroying our freedoms, and the public education system runs right through the middle of all these problems. So we did, after the book, the book was really a tremendous opportunity to learn about these things and to get the word out. So many radio interviews, TV interviews, and meeting all these people contacting me and saying, I have another piece of the puzzle that you need. So finally, in February of this year, we put together a special report in the New American Magazine called Rescuing Our Children. And I worked with a number of other experts in this field. Dr. Duke Pesto worked very closely with us, Lieutenant Colonel E. Ray Moore of Frontline Ministries, Exodus Mandate, who advocates getting the children out, Israel Wayne, one of the big leaders in the homeschool movement at the national level. And we decided that we were going to start this campaign to rescue as many of America's children from illiteracy, from spiritual, destruction, from dumbing down as we possibly could. And we put out this magazine. Our goal is to get 1 million copies of it. And as part of that, I decided, you know what? I need to go all across America and tell people about this. I need to meet the people who are active in this field. And so that's kind of how it started. On May 15th, we took off from Florida, got a trailer, got the wife and kids. And I think at this point now we're up at almost 70 stops across 30-something states. All the ones that are open to the public you can find at libertysentinel.org/tour. Although, by the time a lot of people hear this, I'll probably be getting close to the end of it. But it's just been tremendous. A lot of churches have had me there, Tea Party groups, different conservative political organizations. A lot of chapters of the John Birch Society have brought me in. And, it's just been a tremendous opportunity. Actually, here in Phoenix, Arizona, your most recent superintendent of public instruction is the one who's helping to organize my event here. So I've had an amazing chance to meet, members of Congress and state legislators and parents and grandparents and pastors, hoping to start a national movement for parents to get their children out of the schools. And that really is the goal. That's why we call it Rescuing Our Children and Our Nation. We want to get the kids out and use that as a springboard to save not just our children, but also our country and our freedoms.
I want to give you a little bit of just historical perspective. You may not know this, but you're in Tempe, Arizona right now. Physically, everything kind of runs together anymore. It didn't used to, but it does now. We're in Tempe, Arizona, and many years ago, this was the birthplace of the homeschool movement. Way back when, there was a publishing company back in the 70s by the name of Alpha Omega Publishing, and they were some of the first publishers of any PAC material that could be given to parents to actually help their children and teach your children at home. And they started right here in Tempe, Arizona. And just by coincidence, I ran into the guys that were running it. It was all run by Christians, of course, but educators. And I had a printing company back then in Scottsdale. And we had a certain type of a printing press that allowed printing on both sides of the paper, which is kind of cool back then. But we printed newsletters and brochures and stuff like that. And we had a printing contract with them. Their first pack booklets were published and printed right here in Tempe, Arizona.
Wow.
It just takes me way back. And because of that, I got involved early on with the homeschool movement, obviously, and I got to know those guys pretty well. And fortunately, and I say so fortunately, both of my children, who are now in their 30s, early to mid-30s, they never set foot in a school.
That's awesome. I'm hearing two primary stories. The one is from the people who sent their children to government school, and they say, "Oh, I don't know what happened. My kid is now, they got purple hair and a mohawk, and they live in the basement, and I'm never going to get grandkids. They can't even have a basic job, and even McDonald's won't hire them. What am I going to do?" And that, unfortunately, that's a product of the government school system. Then I meet people who homeschooled their children, and I get the testimonies like that. And you were one of the early pioneers in this, Pat. So you kind of lived in a different world. Today, I tell parents there has never been in human history an easier or a better time to homeschool your children. There are endless numbers of resources. If you live in even a small town, you'll have homeschool co-ops of all different types. If you're a Presbyterian, you might have a Presbyterian one. If you're just if you want to do an art homeschool co-op, there's going to be an art homeschool co-op in your town, and it's just amazing. And the data also supports this view, Pat. One of the things I focus on in my talk is the data on the homeschooling. It's just incredible. With an average of like $500 a year, homeschooled students are running circles around the kids in the government schools, around the victims of the government schools, on every metric. On the academic achievement test, they're in the 80th to 90th percentile. And this is just with a few hours of formal instruction a day, if that, compared to, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 12 years for these kids in the government schools. And even on socialization, you get a lot of parents that, I'm worried about my kids being properly socialized. There's a lot of data on that, too. People can go over to the National Home Education Research Institute. It's the NHERI.org and find all the data. Turns out homeschoolers are better socialized on every metric that we can measure. They do better as adults. They start companies. Their marriages last longer. They get in less trouble with the law. It's incredible. And the difference is like night and day. And you think, well, how did these parents do it? Did they have formal training to educate their kids? No. Even if they don't even have a high school diploma, the results are the same. And so I tell people kind of half jokingly, you could leave your kids in a closet for 12 years and they'd be better off than sending them to a government school. And I'm only half joking because the government schools are doing exactly what you said. They're handicapping these children. They're impeding their ability to learn for themselves. My education was very heavy on brainwashing and indoctrination, but I did learn how to read properly. They taught me how to read with phonics. They gave me reasoning skills. They taught me logic and philosophy, and so I was able to learn for myself. I feel so bad for these children coming out of the public schools today. They can't even open a book and read. They can't even read their own high school diploma, much less the Bible or the Constitution or an important history book. It's tragic, and what I'm saying is our republic is not going to survive another generation or two of this.
There was about 15 years ago, there was I wouldn't call it a scandal, but there was a very embarrassing piece of information that came to light about universities around America who, because of their tie to government education, and of course that in that period of time, the university system was already going towards money. They were shifting over from being education just to being a business, and trying to get more money out of students and student loans, stuff like that. But there was several articles that came out on this. There was no love lost between universities and the homeschool movement in general, but they were secretly courting homeschool students to come to their schools.
Yep.
Secretly, I say. This was not ever publicized until, somebody looked under the lid and said, hey, what's going on here? The reason that they were courting homeschool kids was to raise the grade average of their pathetic education that they were delivering. And students were just failing and they were just doing miserably The homeschool students that they get their hands on came in and just sucked it up and were able to really get good grades, and they raised the bell curve that they had to show to everybody else. Hey, we're a great school. We're really on top of this, man. We're like Harvard or Princeton or something. And there's a lot of fraud, but the homeschool students came in and were spectacular students in college.
Yeah, and that's still true today. Even the elite universities are out there actively recruiting homeschoolers these days because they know, hey, these are the kids who are going to sit in class and learn. These are the kids who are going to end up making a lot of money, and they can help fund our endowment. These are the future leaders. These are the leaders of tomorrow. And I actually see that I teach at the Freedom Project Academy. I teach advanced economics to, I call them some of America's brightest high school students. And I don't have any exaggeration in that at all. These kids are really, really smart. And they're coming out of the homeschool movement. These are children from homeschool parents who, okay, now my son's in 11th grade. I don't know how to teach advanced biology or chemistry or whatever, so I'll put him in the school. And the difference between them and the kids coming out of the public schools is like the difference between night and day. It's phenomenal to be able to see this, to be a part of this. And it's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope for the future because, I recognize millions of our children are being handicapped. They're being dumbed down in a way that really prevents them from thinking at all. But when you see the caliber of students being educated in a lot of these private schools coming out of the homeschool movement, you realize that, hey, these are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, not the kids living at their mom's basement with purple hair.
And this is the heartbeat of conditioning, isn't it? These students in the government schools are literally being conditioned to make the right response given a certain stimulus. According to whose policy? Where does this? What are they being conditioned for? What's the master template that's being put on us here? And I know probably you want to kind of lead into maybe some United Nations stuff and the No Child Left Behind and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that is exactly what's happening, and it's amazing because they'll tell you all of this, right? None of this information is secret. I just go to the UN's website and get all this stuff and throw it in my presentation, and people are shocked. I'm like, anybody could have gone to the UN's website and picked this stuff up. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, we're now moving towards this global conditioning system. The United Nations, the Assistant Secretary General Robert Mueller, developed what he calls the World Core Curriculum. It's like Common Core for the planet. UNESCO's got it on their website. You can read about this. And if you actually do any digging at all, you don't have to do a lot of digging. Go pick up the teacher's manual at your local library, for example, and you can read the foreword. And right in the foreword, he tells you the underlying philosophy upon which this system is based will be found in the books of Alice Bailey as set forth by the Tibetan teacher Jwal Khul. And to most Americans, that means nothing. Well, all you got to do is look up Alice Bailey and you'll find out right away this was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, right? I mean, it is not secret information. This Jwal Khul, the Tibetan who supposedly laid down these teachings that Robert Mueller based his World Core Curriculum on, the guy's not even a person, right? It was an ascended master, as Alice Bailey called it, who was writing these books for her. And, when you see this pattern emerging, and they're telling us this openly. They talk about we're going towards this new world order. You have documents like Agenda 21, where Chapter 36 is entirely dedicated to education, and they'll tell you right in there, we're going to change the values, attitudes, beliefs, practices of people to bring about sustainable development. They say formal and non-formal education are indispensable to changing people's attitudes. In Agenda 2030, adopted in 2015 by Obama and every other government, they say the same kind of stuff. Your children are critical agents of change, and they're going to use these new goals to create a better world. And then you ask, well, what's a better world? Well, they'll tell you right in the same thing. Wealth redistribution, abortions for everyone, government control over production and consumption. We're talking about a technocratic global system, as you've pointed out so aptly, Pat, and they are now preparing children all over the world for it. And they're even coming after the homeschoolers. They're even coming after the people who are not involved in this conditioning system. I think the reason why is they're worried about, the boy who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. If you get even a few people who escape the indoctrination and the conditioning, there's always the risk that they might point out, the emperor is actually naked and people might wake up. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a whole generation of human beings for the first time in human history being prepared, being conditioned to submit to what I consider to be nightmarish policies.
Right. There's a thread that runs through the United Nations documents as well as all the way back to original technocracy documents from the 1930s. And that was these scientists and engineers, or pseudoscientists and pseudo-engineers, okay, that wanted to engineer society with using their hard science skills. They thought, they could just transfer them over onto the human population and use those things to craft society. They had this dream that they could actually do this, but they had one problem. They knew if they couldn't get everybody to participate, it wouldn't work.
Right.
The machine has to be a whole machine. It can't be part of it. You can't have part of a factory floor where a manager is managing it and there's another, 10,000 square feet over here. He doesn't have a clue what's going on. You have to manage the whole thing. That means you have to monitor the whole thing. You have to have it all in the same big view where you can look down at it. This gave way to writings in the 30s about the importance of no person left behind. You see this all over their literature, and you see it all the way through the United Nations literature today. I don't care what, for instance, Sustainable Development Goal you look at, all 17 of them have something about everybody has to be involved. And you see it in the cashless society, for instance. They want everybody in the banking system. You see it in education. We've had 2 iterations now of No Child Left Behind, one something like that. George Bush certainly had that with No Child Left Behind. But this has been a constant, consistent mantra. Obviously, it's important to them. Okay, I just say that. It's important to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking about it all the time.
That's right.
They need to get everybody in the system. Is this kind of what we're talking about today with this global education system, to get everybody fitted in somehow?
That's exactly what we're talking about, Pat. It's interesting. Goal number 4 in the Sustainable Development Goals, they literally use those exact terms. They say all learners. They don't even make a distinction between children and adults, right? There's no little asterisks exempting, tribesmen in the Amazon rainforest, or homeschooled American Christian students, or pygmies in Central Africa. All learners, and they actually say, must not just passively submit to sustainable development. The word that's used in goal number 4 is they have to promote sustainable development. So, they're talking some really serious indoctrination there to get every person on the planet so brainwashed that they will promote an ideology that is completely at odds with the founding principles of our republic, completely at odds with the principles of liberty, completely at odds with biblical principles. They're talking about a massive, well-oiled machine. And they've repeatedly now told us that any deviation from this is unacceptable. In 2015, the UN Human Rights Council, and I feel ludicrous even calling it a Human Rights Council. It's Cuba, Venezuela, China, Saudi Arabia. They all get to sit on there. Some of the worst mass murdering dictatorships on the planet. But they passed this resolution saying that it's not okay that there's all these private schools all over the world that are unregulated and unmonitored. They said every school on the planet needs to use the same standards of learning, and that governments have a responsibility to enforce that. And if you look at their international agreements on education, they all say the same thing, Pat. In 1990, they came up in Jomtien in Thailand. They got an Education for All, a global agreement on education. They said every school in the world has to use the same standards of learning. And then they say that the basic learning content required by all human beings is not a responsibility of the family or your local school district or your state legislature or your Congress or even your Supreme Court. In America today, they think they're the supreme legislative body. But that it's a common and universal responsibility. So Rocket Man over in North Korea and the Castro regime and Mugabe, they all get to help us decide what are the common learning standards that every child on the planet must learn from. And we need to understand, they fully intend to get every last person on this planet involved in their system. And, in Brave New World, they at least had savage reservations, where they would let the people who didn't want to participate live as quote-unquote savages. But I really get the sense that in this emerging system that they're developing, they will not tolerate any deviation from their prescribed agenda.
So we're talking about a system of global brainwashing that's all consistent, that has a consistent message, regardless of the, let's say, the means of delivery of the information. Because I realize education systems are going to be slightly different from country to country, just like they are in America from state to state. But the objective is to get a certain dogma put into the children's head so that they will be good little global citizens. And what you're saying is this is consistent, or all of this dogma is consistent with the tenets of sustainable development.
Precisely.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay. So,
and they tell you that, Pat. You can watch the head of the United Nations. You can go on YouTube right now and find him telling you that the purpose of education is to create good global citizens. I mean, they're telling us this.
Right. So we have the global citizens coming up through the education arm. I just looking back at our school system, because this is what people are going to be concerned with here, as we're mostly heard in the United States. There are some overseas people listening, but they will have the same thing. They all have government schools of one kind or another. Ours just happened. Maybe ours is ahead of theirs a little bit, a little bit better. I don't know. But here's my question. Is it possible, and this is going to be critical for parents to listen carefully here to the answer. Is it possible in the typical American government school, is it possible for let's say a Christian parent, and I don't want to limit it just to Christian parent, any parent that wants their kid to have a decent education, is it possible to beat the government school system if you put your kid in? Is it possible to beat it in some other way, like, having an hour a day at night to unwind some of those things and to try and, educate the child properly? Well, don't listen to that propaganda, that's not true, and then you listen to this over here. Is it possible today for a parent to beat the government school system?
I consider it to be akin to playing Russian roulette. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not possible, because occasionally a kid slips through the cracks. Somebody who's exceptionally intelligent, somebody whose parents really did the hard work of teaching them phonics before they went into the government school and got dumbed down with the whole word method. It's not out of the question, but it is very rare in my experience. The Nehemiah Institute did an interesting survey. They estimated that almost 80% of Christian children who go through 12 years of government indoctrination will end up leaving the church. They will come out with the official government religion of the United States, humanism. And, they've got it down to such a science now where you have some of these people who talk about how in 1 hour they can undo everything that parents have done over 15 or 16 years. In the Humanist magazine, you had one of these humanists talk about how, what possible chance do parents have and Sunday school with 1 hour a week against the government school that has the child for 6, 7, 8 hours a week for 5 days, 6 to 8 hours a day for 5 days a week for most of the year. And the short answer is very, very little chance. So I don't want to say it's not possible, but I also don't want to give any parent false hope. I really consider it to be akin to playing Russian roulette, but instead of having just one bullet in the chamber and 6 empty chambers, you're playing with 5 bullets in the chamber and 1 empty one. You don't want to do it. You don't want to risk it. Your kids are too valuable. You need to pull them out.
I feel a lot of compassion for parents who have children now maybe that are through high school or they're in high school and they're having trouble, and they're having great angst over it because, hey, this is their kid, they love their child, and they tried to do the very best they could. They thought they were doing the very best thing, and now their kid is having trouble in school or just in life because of school, and they're having remorse, they're having guilt. They feel like they're failing as parents. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong, or whatever? Didn't I do the best for you? That sort of thing. I have a lot of compassion for parents who are kind of trapped into that situation now. They thought they could beat the system. They thought they could do well. Well, I really want to put my kid, I paid the taxes for it. I really want to put my kid in government school, and it's a place for them to go. Well, I'm working, maybe I got a job, whatever, and I can't really do it all at home. They talk themselves out of homeschooling for whatever reason, and they allowed their child to go to government schools, and now they're paying a price for it. What does a parent do at that point? What does a parent do, Alex, to kind of remedy the situation? Are there any steps that can be taken? Where does a parent start to kind of like reconstruct and recover a little bit? They'll never go back to ground zero. I realize that, but what do they do to get out of that mode?
That is such a good question, Pat, and that's exactly the question that I'm considering now, because for next year we want to start putting together some resources for the exact type of parents you just mentioned. I've met so many of them on this trip, and it just breaks my heart. They didn't know what was happening in the government schools. They went to government school in the 60s, maybe in the 50s. It wasn't all that bad. We used to say prayer. We learned how to read. We did that kind of stuff. And so they didn't know. And like you, I'm just moved with compassion. It's tragic. Unfortunately, in some cases, these government schools were so successful in interrupting a child's ability to think critically. You see this now with this incredible emotionalism. You try to present facts or evidence or a well-reasoned argument, and the response is just shrieking and, well, my feelings this, my feelings that. It can be very, very difficult. I think the Bible has some incredible wisdom, and it's applicable even to people who are not Christian. It's almost a truism. Proverbs 22:6 says that you should train up your child in the way that he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, if parents do a good job of doing that, there's a very good chance that those children will grow up to be, responsible, moral, decent human beings. When you let Caesar do that, and anybody listening to this podcast probably already has some quibbles with Caesar, right? Whether it be the funding of abortion with tax money, or the LGBT agenda, or the starting wars based on lies, or the sustainable development, all the UN agreement. We all recognize that Caesar is out of line here, and if you let this Caesar train up your children in the way that they should go, there's a very good chance that that's the way they will go when they're older. And it's very sad to see this, because there's now so many millions of Americans who are ensnared in this exact question. So we're looking at this right now, Pat. We want to put together some resources. I think some of the basics is what we really need to start with, because it happened to me. I was totally indoctrinated, and then I started coming across little bits of information that didn't compute. I went to international schools, as I mentioned, and so I was way more indoctrinated to love the UN than even an average American. And when I found out what the UN had done in Katanga, they sent these peace troops in, and they slaughtered women and children. That didn't compute, so I had to dig deeper. And that one lie that was exposed ended up leading me down different rabbit trails, where I started realizing, oh my goodness, I was lied to about all kinds of different things. Now, the difference was I had the ability to read. I had the ability to go get a book at the library if I was curious about, say, the Federal Reserve, and I could read 10 books on it and learn. A lot of American children, the government's own data shows this, a lot of American adults can't read. So it's very difficult. We're going to try to put together some resources where we're going to have some key things like this. What you didn't learn about American history, for example. If you talk to an average high school senior today, ask them about God-given rights, they'll say, what do you mean that's the kookiest thing, you religious nut? There's no such thing as God-given rights. Say, wait, you don't realize that our republic was founded on the principle that God gave us rights and that we create a government to protect those rights? Most of them don't. And so when they realize that, they think, whoa, what else was I lied to about? So that's kind of the approach, the strategy that we're going to be using. We want to show the children some of the lies that they've been taught and hope that that will trigger an interest in, getting them involved in furthering their own education. Actually starting from ground zero, getting a real education. But it's a long process. And it requires unlearning a lot of things. One of the things I talk about in my talk is the values clarification. It was used on me, and it's such an effective tool. What they do in just a short 1-hour exercise, they're able to shatter a child's belief in moral absolutes. They tell them there's 9 of you in a life raft and only 8 of you can survive. Who are you going to get rid of? And the kids think, well, hey, mom and dad said we shouldn't kill people. The pastor said we shouldn't kill people. The Bible said we shouldn't kill people. But obviously the only moral solution here now is to kill somebody so that we can all survive. It's for the greater good. So to undo the damage that has been done with exercises like that takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of self-reflection, and it takes a lot of humility to say, whoa, here I was thinking I was the smartest thing that's ever walked on this planet because I know how to use my iPhone and whatever. And it turns out I was miseducated. I was handicapped. It takes a big, supply of humility to be able to accept that, whoa, I was duped. I was foolish enough to believe this stuff. And for me, that was like a 12-year process. And unfortunately, almost everybody in our society today has got to go through that. It's very tough, but it's very necessary.
Yeah, it really is. I want to shift gears just a little bit here and talk about the upcoming Citizens for Free Speech fly-in in Phoenix here. That's going to take place on October 12th. It's a Saturday, a one-day meeting, limited to 100 people, by the way. And if anybody has a mind to go to citizensforfreespeech.org and get on the mailing list there and join up with us, we're going to have a one-day intensive seminar on that Saturday to discuss solutions. This is a leadership meeting primarily, but we're going to discuss specific solutions that the average citizen can take in their own communities to overcome some of these problems. And education is a key area that has been infiltrated with this kind of stuff. And anybody that has kids in school that's been, kind of aware of what's going on, they know they're in a battle zone. They know they're constantly fighting one thing or another with their school system. If you just leave it alone for 6 months, and you'll have some new thing come at you. Oh my gosh, where did that come from, and how do we get rid of it? We want to deliver actual, tangible tools to people to go out and do things that will substantively block some of these things. Throw a monkey wrench, the proverbial monkey wrench, into their mechanism. I've been amazed, for instance, at all of the people across the country that have been involved with some organizations like Act for America, for instance, that have dedicated themselves to be textbook readers. And they're going in and reading the textbooks that are being used in schools to find out and to identify where Islamic doctrine has been slipped into the textbook, because this has actually happened. This was a strategy that they used to get their doctrine into it. Okay, well, it doesn't belong there. Yet students get it, and they don't know they're getting it. They just get it. Oh, yeah, okay. But by the time they get out of school, they have a totally favorable view towards Islam, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, how boring is it to sit around reading textbooks? But when they find something, they take it to the superintendent of schools, whatever, and say, you know what, this doesn't belong in here. You can't have this in here, because you can't put stuff on the Bible in there either, right? So you can't have this stuff in there.
Right.
And they've been incredibly successful to weed some of this stuff out of the textbooks, at least so it isn't there. Now, that's a small thing, I realize, but it shows you that there are tangible, concrete things people can do that will make a difference in their local community. Education is one. Certainly people are concerned about all kinds of other things, property rights and the degradation of property rights. They're concerned about all these general plans and stuff that are being implemented in their city. They're driving costs up of housing and transportation, and the bike lanes going in, and now you're afraid you're going to hit a bicyclist on the highway, and the bicyclist is afraid that you're going to hit him too. Now we got scooters all over the place in Tempe and Phoenix, the little e-scooters and e-bikes and everything, and they're cluttering the sidewalks, and things are just going haywire. One of my friends who will be at the fly-in, and you're going to be at the fly-in, by the way, so you'll be able to contribute your part to this. And one of my friends, Mary Baker, who also would be there, she's the author of Citizen Ninja Stand Up to Power. She told me one time, if you don't have a seat at the table, you are what's on the menu for dinner.
That's a good way to put it.
You can't boil it down anymore.
Right.
If you don't have a seat on the table, you're what's for dinner. And Americans across the board who have inadvertently been talked out of their seat at the table, now they're wondering what we're talking about here. How did we get to this? How did we get to this state? Well, there just wasn't enough people that had a seat at the table when the decisions were being made, and the decisions got made, and you weren't there. And so now you're looking backwards at the decisions having been made. So, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is terrible. The world is falling apart, right under my eyes. And say, wait a minute. If everybody had had their seat at the table like they should have in the first place, as representative society, for instance, we never would be in most of the position we would not be in today if people had been awake and alert when the stuff first started. And that's especially true with all the Agenda 21 stuff that has snuck in over the last 25 years. It's just incredible. I said, well, it's voluntary. Yeah, it's voluntary, right? Well, in
like
a sense,
income taxes are voluntary.
Like I know, they make it in such a way that, how can you refuse this voluntary deal? You can't. So we have a lot of problems in society right now. I think everybody knows that we're just about the end of our rope. And we, if we're going to make a difference in this country, it's got to be now. I fully believe that. We'll talk about that more in our fly-in. And I want to invite anybody, if anybody in this audience has any desire to stand up and be a leader in their community, to do things that will push back against some of this agenda, this CFFS Phoenix fly-in is where you want to be on that one day. And it's just one day. You're not sacrificing a week. You can fly in Saturday afternoon. Saturday is going to be the meeting, and then you can go home on Sunday, and you don't miss any work or whatever. And we're going to have tangible solutions for people to go home with, as well as being able to interact with people like you and stuff to get connected, to rub shoulders a little bit. I'm so sick of social media. I hate to tell you. I want to give people an opportunity to look somebody else in the eyeball that has something to say, and just, what? Can I touch you? Can I can I just kind of interact with you and just breathe some of this, in the airspace, whatever. And we need to get back to this, I think, in our country. I think that's going to be part of our salvation, if you will, is reconnecting people with people, and not through social media exclusively. But, hey, real people talking face to face about important subjects. This is where it has to start. I'm just putting the flag in the ground. I'm saying, okay, October 12 is going to be that day. We're going to start this. We're going to put people together in the same room, intelligent, capable, experienced, successful people that have done things. Okay, guys, you figure it out now. I'm not going to be figuring it out necessarily. You guys figure it out. How are we going to move forward with this and make a difference in our society? And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about you coming and stuff. But of those materials and stuff that I would speak about, whatever, I know you've already said 2 or 3 times you've got lots of stuff that you're working, that you already have, the stuff that you're working on. How can you deliver this material? Is it is it verbal? Is it printed material? What could people expect?
Well, I really love your focus on activism at the local level, because that really is where most people can have the largest impact. The people in your community. And so one of the things that we're working on is trying to get affordable, cost-effective, accurate materials to people at the local level so that they can do things with it. So, for example, I mentioned that special report we did in the New American Magazine on February 4th. We're trying to get 1 million copies out, and we are depending on local activists all across America to help us get those into the hands of the people who need them. So we've got people all over the country who've ordered 100 or maybe 1,000 copies. We've got low-cost DVDs selling them for $1 a piece. And the local level is where things actually get done. So you mentioned Act for America. I mean, they've got chapters all across America. They're doing amazing things. I was actually hosted in Cleveland, Ohio, by the local chapter there. They did a phenomenal job. These are local people in their local community. They brought out hundreds of people live and in person, and they got hundreds more over the live stream to hear about education, to hear about what they as individuals could do. So I'm really excited about this on October 12th, because it's going to be an opportunity, I think, for citizens to get the information and the know-how that they need to really make a difference. And as you mentioned, we're getting into a tight spot right now as a society, as a country. We're moving more and more away from the principles of liberty, and the consequences of this are going to be serious. So now is the time for everybody out there. Listening to podcasts is good. You need to have good information, but you also need to get active. You need to get trained in what you need to know to do something with that information you're getting. So I think this is going to be a brilliant opportunity for that, Pat. I'm super excited to be there. I know some of the other people who are going to be there are just amazing, leaders in this field of trying to make a difference at the local level, getting the information out at the local level. And ultimately, that's how this battle for freedom is going to be won, is people at the local level with accurate materials, useful information, and knowing the correct tactics to make a difference. That's how we're going to win this. And so I hope everybody will come out.
And I will say that the United Nations has had the motto for decades now, to think global, act local.
That's right.
This was their thing. This is how the local stuff came to us. We have to work it backwards on them. The national government's not going to come in and save any community.
That's right.
Your state government's not going to come in and save any community. And you might even say, without any prodding, your city council isn't going to come in and save you from anything either. So it's up to citizens. It's back to citizens again. I think about how the Revolutionary War was fought back when we gained our independence from England, and this wasn't like a military draft or anything. It's that people were farming in their field one day, pulling a plow behind a horse, and Daniel says, "Well, I'm." As he picks up his musket, he said, "I hope I come back, because I'm going to go defend our, little territory here, whatever, from invasion, or help to liberate it." And it was just people in their local communities that stood up and say, "Hey, I have to go. I have to make a difference." This is a mentality we've lost in America, I think. But boy, I'll tell you, now's the time to get it back, because this is the fabric of the city and the community. I don't want to use the word community too much, because the UN uses that, but the city, the town, this is the fabric out of which America is made. The fabric is not the national government. The fabric is not the state government. The fabric is the cities where people live. That's where the citizens are.
Yeah.
They're not in the state capitol house. They're not in Washington, D.C. There's supposed to be representatives there, but that's failed some time ago. They live in the cities, and they live in the towns, they live in the rural areas. This is where they need to make a difference. And I'll tell you, not 100% of everybody in every community is going to make a difference. You know that. But we don't need everybody.
That's right.
We just need, 4, 5, 6% of the people. If they would stand up and say, I'm going to make a difference, they will make a difference in that community. And they just need to be equipped. And when I say equipped, we don't need cowboys in this movement. This is not the Wild West where you go, blazing saddles and blazing guns, I'm here, I'm going to shoot them up, I'm going to, run the criminals out of Dodge or whatever. That's not the way we do it in this century. And so we need people that don't have that cowboy mentality, that are willing to dig in, get some skills, learn how to control themselves. Honestly, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. What we need in America today are statesmen.
Yeah. Statesmen
who are able to navigate through all kinds of situations without offending everybody in sight.
Right.
and able to deliver wisdom back to the people. Those are the ones that need to have the encouragement first.
Yeah.
And America has been so devoid of statesmen for so long. I can't think of the last time in my lifetime that I can point back and say that guy was a statesman, truly.
Yeah.
There have been a few. I think of one, Alan Keyes.
Yeah.
I believe he's a statesman. He's a good example of a statesman.
Yeah.
We need more people.
I would throw Ron Paul in the ring too.
Yeah.
I mean,
we need more. We need more people like that in our country that aren't hostile to everybody for one, but are able to stand up and deliver a good, logical, coherent argument against why they are right and somebody else is wrong.
And unite people behind the principles of liberty and righteousness instead of dividing people along arbitrary lines, how much melanin you have in your skin or something like that. Right. That's really what we need. And, I'm super excited about this. And I think you said something really important about the change happening at the local level. Tom DeWeese is going to be there on October 12th. Is that right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I just finished reviewing his book, Sustainable. It was really good.
Yes.
And he's got some incredible stories in there. I hope we're going to spend some time talking about them on October 12th, like Ringe, New Hampshire. This little community in New Hampshire. They told the sustainability nuts to get out of their town and quit messing with their local community. And so they turned down the federal money, and they also turned down the federal control. That's what we need, and it didn't take an army. It didn't take a bunch of cowboys with 6 shooters. It took dedicated, passionate, well-trained leaders in the local community to rally that community against these totalitarian policies. And that's what we need across the whole country.
Right. And we do want to share those success stories. You're never going to hear about those in the media. Like the mainstream media is never going to have any success story that anybody had on a local basis like that.
That's right.
So we want to make sure that people know, there are lots of little flashes of light out there where things have happened due to citizen effort and stuff that just are marvelous. You just want to rejoice that they've done something. And it's unfortunate, of course, that this is censorship in America today. The people at the top don't want you to know those stories because it might spread. It might end up like the people in Hong Kong right now. We're all in the street demanding change in leadership, But anyway, we're going to take after it. Well, we're kind of up against our time limit right now. I don't want to wear everybody out. I don't want to wear you out. I really thank you for being in studio to share with us today, Alex. And
it's an honor and a pleasure, Pat. Thank you.
I know. I just say, is there anything really important that we missed that you just, I just got to say this?
Well, first I want to just thank you for having me on the program. I love all the work you're doing. Technocracy.news is an incredible source of information for staying up to date on these really important developments. And there's nobody out there doing what you're doing, Pat. So I'm just so pleased to be able to be here with you. And thank you for what you're doing. And, the local activists, just a great service. I'm having a great time on there connecting with other local activists. If people want to know more about this education stuff we've been talking about, you can go to thenewamerican.com/rescuingourchildren. You can get a copy of the magazine or the DVD right there. If you order just one copy, you can use the promo code EDUCATE19, and we'll actually pay the shipping and handling for you. And if you agree that this issue is important, in fact, if you agree that this issue of education transcends all these other battles that we're fighting, we hope that you'll get involved and help us out. Help us get copies of that out. Maybe order 12 and give one to your pastor and one to your neighbor, and one to the elders at your church, and one to your congressman, or whoever you have access to help us really start turning this around. And I think you said another profound thing too, Pat. There's this kind of despair that, well, we're never going to be able to convince 51% of Americans to come over to our side. We don't need 51% of Americans. Most Americans are not going to get involved in the battle either way, right, on one side or the other. They'll just go with the wind. And all we need is a small, dedicated group of people across America willing to get active in their local communities, stand up for the truth, stand up for what's right, stand up for freedom, and we can turn this ship around. So thank you, Pat, for the leadership that you're providing in this fight, and thank you for having me on the program. Thank you to the listeners, too, for spending all this time with us. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we may have an opportunity to do this again. If you're anywhere in the area of Alex speaking about education especially, make sure to get out and go, whatever, pay to cover fee and get out there and help pay for the room, as the case may be. He's speaking this Tuesday in the Phoenix area. If anybody is in the Phoenix area listening to this, go to, where would they go to find out exactly where it is, by the way?
I consolidated all the speeches that I'm giving that are open to the public at libertysentinel.org/tour. So you can find the contact person for Phoenix, and then I'll be in Albuquerque, Houston, Oklahoma. I've got 5 or 6 in Texas, then down in Alabama, then Florida, New York, North Carolina. We got a whole bunch coming up. So libertysentinel.org/tour.
And I have to say, if you want to see a bunch of other people who are really concerned about education, go to one of those meetings, because that's where they're going to accumulate.
Yep.
They will come out of the community, the society that they live in, whatever, and they will be there. So if you want to be encouraged by other like-minded people that are, or maybe just people that are curious like you that would go to one of these meetings and start the process for yourself to learn what's going on and what you can do about it. We can make a huge difference. And you know what? I wrote in my book, even if we're not able to be successful, we have to acknowledge that fact. It may be too late. The tipping point may have happened. But I want to say this to everybody, and I want you to take it straight to heart. It is never wrong to do the right thing.
Amen.
It is always right to do the right thing. And I don't care what the outcome is. It will never excuse any one of us for doing the wrong thing. It just won't. So we need to do the right thing in every case. And, I use this just from my perspective. You do what you can, and you have to leave the rest up to God.
That's true.
That's the end of it. You just do what you can, but you just can't sit back and say, I'm just going to, nothing I can do. Let it all fall apart, whatever. That's the most selfish attitude a person can have on the planet. Yeah. It's just not true. You have to care about your fellow man and the people that live in your community and your family and, the people that you love. You have to care about them. If you care about them, you want to make sure that they're going to have a future that is at least as good as the one you had when you grew up. And right now it's looking pretty dim. So we have a big task ahead of us. It is not hopeless, however. We're never out of hope. And we do what's right because it's right to do, and that's the best you can do. We're going to give it a good try with the CFFS Phoenix fly-in on October 12th. You can go to citizensforfreespeech.org and buy a ticket there if you'd like to attend. It's not very expensive, just one day, but we need to pay the hotel for the room and for the food and the beverage to keep you hydrated for the day. We don't want anybody falling over, so we're gonna make sure that you leave in as good a shape as you come. But if you're prone to leadership and you want to get involved and get in the mix of things, just get on board. Just get on board. And if you can't come to fly in, at least go to citizensforfreespeech.org and put your name, join up, put your name on a list, get in the stream of things, get the flow of information coming out. We haven't talked about the First Amendment and how we want to defend the First Amendment. I'm not going to talk about it now either, Alex, but you know all this stuff, and I'm not talking to you. The First Amendment is the last defense we have in America, and all the things it has in it. Now, the freedom of expression of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the right to assemble peaceably, the right to seek redress of grievances with the government. This is the First Amendment. If we lose the First Amendment, you realize what's next? The Second Amendment.
And that won't be good.
The framers, that's right. The framers of the Constitution did that on purpose. That's documented. They put the First Amendment first, and they put the Second Amendment second. If we lose the first, we're going to be facing the second. And I'll tell you, that is not where we want to go.
Amen.
We already have some sparks of that from time to time. We don't want to go there. Just flat out don't. I never, ever in my lifetime want to see Americans killing other Americans. That's just inconceivable to me. So we need to stand up and get behind the First Amendment, all of which is action-oriented. You don't have free speech unless you're speaking, for peace sake. Yeah. You don't have freedom of the press unless you're writing. It's not an esoteric concept. It's an action-oriented concept in the First Amendment, and that's what we're all about at Citizens for Free Speech, is elevating and defending the First Amendment with everything that we can, and that means getting out and getting involved in our local communities, period, end of subject. So I'll leave it with that, Alex. Thank you so much for being here. I hope your trip goes well. You're going to love the rest of it. Stay in Arizona, I hope. It's kind of warm this time.
Just a little.
I'll forget that. You want to enjoy it. It's really hot here today, one of the hottest days of the year. But God bless you for taking out after all this and traveling around the country to do this. We'll catch up next time. I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you next time.